Okay, thanks. We want to talk today about using divs and CSS to upgrade your personal websites from the table layout that we initially present to all of our members and interns. And so Jacob, who is a professional programmer and studied computer science and math at MIT, is going to present this transition from table layout, which tends to be very simple and easy to understand, to using divs and CSS, the advantages of that approach to web design. Okay, Jacob, take it away.
Okay, HTML tables are often used, especially by beginners, first learning how to write HTML to sort of govern the layout of the page. Makes it easy to make things line up, or to get the exact layout of where things go. By experienced web designers, they're kind of frowned upon. I would say they're frowned upon to use them for layout. If you have tabular data, we say that's a good reason to use a table. So if you have a chart with a bunch of say there was a football game and you have a chart of the statistics of the football game. Okay, that's a good reason to use tables. But because you just need pictures on one side and links on the other side, or you want to organize your links in a row, that can all be done without using a table for layout. And the reasons, we'll just go through a few reasons. In fact, there are a bunch, and I might miss a couple. So first, we like to have we call separation of concerns between HTML and CSS. We want to have semantic markup in HTML. HTML should say what it is, not how to style it. So having a table, if you're just using it for layout, that sort of breaks that rule. And so that if you decide later that you want to change, the style, you may end up having to change both, both HTML files and CSS files if you start specifying if you use things like table element. That goes for other elements in HTML that govern that can govern layout or style. There's like the center tag, which has sort of fallen out of style now, but for a while was used often in HTML, that kind of centered things on the page. Or even just having inline CSS styles, like you can in HTML, is generally not a good idea. We'd prefer to have all the style in CSS. Tables often require more markup, and so the table element, you have the TR and the TD, and maybe maybe if you have a fancy table with like a T head and and so forth, there might be even more. And so sometimes alternatives also require a lot of markup, but tables are just about as markup heavy as any other solution. So that's just that it's maybe not a huge hit on performance, but maybe it can make your code less readable. And that's another reason in general to avoid tables, is that they usually make your HTML less readable to someone who's just looking at your code for the first time, trying to figure out what things do, what everything is. If you see a table, again, that could be anything. Ideally, it would just be a table used for tabular data. Then it would be obvious what it is. But if you use tables for layout, it's not clear at first what exactly is going on. There are performance issues in the browser. Well, most browsers will try to render tables kind of all at once. It's kind of an all-or-nothing proposition. Whereas if you have other sorts of elements, the browser will be able to load kind of one element at a time, and that will that usually means it's a better experience because your page starts loading. It isn't just blank until all of a sudden stuff shows up. And let's see. Am I missing something, John?
This looks great to me, Jacob. It's a matter of in summary, sometimes simplicity of tables versus flexibility and performance of using divs and CSS. Great. Can you go into how we would set up a div and style it with CSS?
Sure, yeah, and that's one thing we mentioned earlier, but I forgot to mention here. Tables are they tend to be kind of inflexible with regard to what you can do with them. CSS, so all but the most basic CSS is can be difficult to work. It can be difficult to work with tables, but on occasion. On occasion, as we'll see here in a second, when we start to look at how to achieve a table-like layout with other elements, there's a reason why a lot of beginners use tables at first, and that's because they're fairly easy. Once you start to get used to CSS and some of the different alternatives, that becomes less of an issue because you're better equipped to quickly and easily you get the layout you want with other methods. And I should mention when we say tables are inflexible with regard to CSS. You could say especially regarding mobile friendliness and responsive design.
Great, that's an important point because we need to design websites now for cell phones and iPads. Great.
And I think that kind of went off the whiteboard there.
No problem. We got it.
Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll look at some examples.
This is great, okay. Jacob. Thank you for that introduction to tables and divs and CSS.
Okay, so for a demo, we're going to have a look at this page from the Build It Yourself website. This is the list of missions. And here what I can do is I can press F12 to open up the developer tools, and we can have a look at the HTML here, and we'll see that it does use a lot of tables. In fact, we definitely have some inline CSS here. See the background color is specified. We've got align equals center. A lot of inline CSS here, which is, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world, but there are benefits to breaking that out of the HTML.
May I speak to that a little bit, Jacob? The
Sure.
benefit, of course, is that if you want to change the style, you have to change it in umpty different places. Whereas if it's in CSS, it can be global to that page, or it can even be global to your whole website.
Yep. So what we're going to take a look at this morning is this section in particular, where we have a table. Actually, it looks like. Oh, hi Nick. Thanks for joining. Another person joined. Okay. You see here we've got a different row for each one of these missions, and then two. It's just a simple two-column layout. And truth be told, it's not, especially for something just super simple like this. You know, it's not the worst thing in the world to use a table layout here. I'm just using this because it's a simple example to recreate. You know, it would be a bigger. I think it would be a bigger design flaw if this was a more complicated page. For something so simple, you know, it's probably not real damaging to use a table there.
Excuse me, Jacob, may I interrupt for just a second?
Sure.
I just want to get Dana's feedback and get Nick up. We're talking, Nick, about the pros and cons of using tables versus divs and CSS, just sort of fundamental look at web design. It brings up many interesting points. Dana, does what Jacob presented, is this all making sense to you? Any questions on tables versus divs and CSS before we get into using divs to recreate a simple table? I'll assume Dana, that unless you turn your microphone on, I'll assume you registered everything. Nick, if we're recording this, so we'll send the recording link out to everyone so you can review the first part of it. Okay, go ahead, Jacob.
Okay. So real briefly, I have another page pulled up here. This is an example of where we definitely do want to use tables. This is a website with statistics for football, and you can see you know, this is what we mean when we say tabular data. It's a table. You've got column headers and rows. And this is a semantic use of a table element in HTML, whereas this you know, this is not what we'd call tabular data. This is just you know, it's a picture with some associated text and a link. It's not what we'd call tabular data. So we can convert this into you know, we can re-implement sort of this layout with semantic CSS. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull over just the actual CSS or the HTML that I've written that we'll use to sort of recreate this this section of the page. And what you should notice that as opposed to you know, as opposed to those tables, you can look at this code and pretty quickly realize what is going on with this HTML. It's more readable. So you look at this. I have these divs, and each div has a class. that specifies what it is. And again, that's semantic in HTML. We want to know what this content is not how to style it. How to style it is the domain of the CSS. So here's a mission, and then within a mission, I have a div that I give the class image container. This is just to help me lay this little hook for CSS, so I can style this in CSS more easily than if I just had an image there. And then we have a div for the mission description, and we have an element that specifies the mission title, and then some paragraphs of text. And then we repeat. So you can look at this right away if you're reading HTML and tell, okay, this is just a list of missions, and each one has kind of these two elements. And I just have, of course, I just have these three hard-coded here. If you had presumably if you had a whole bunch of them, this would be dynamically generated from a database. For now, we're just using these. We're just using static HTML and CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript later on. All static files. Okay, so here, let me refresh here. This is the page as it stands. I added just a little bit of CSS, and I will show you. What I have, nothing for the column layout really yet. Just made the font bold for the title. I'm centering the image within its container, so forth, just basic things. And so this is what it comes before we start really looking at the layout at all. This is what it looks like. Good question from Dana. How do we link a CSS file to an HTML file? The answer is in the HTML file at the very top, and we're gonna look at. I have a couple different. I'm going to show a couple different ways to do what we're trying to do. So I've got some commented out here for later. You have a link tag within the head. So within the head of your HTML page, you have a link tag, and that link has an href. Sort of like an anchor, like a link, like an H element would have, that has the path to the CSS file. And then it has this little this little attribute that says rel equals style sheet, or relation equals style sheet. And you might also see explicitly type equals text slash CSS. CSS. This you can omit this because it is the default for HTML. If you don't say anything, it assumes it's CSS. So now let's have a look at some different ways we can achieve sort of a column layout with the picture on the left and the text on the right. And there are a bunch of different ways to do this. So I just I should say I'll show a few different ways to do it just for fun and for your information. And then I have sort of the way that I would do it if I were, if this were a website that I was making, for my my job. And I think the way that the easy way moving forward that I think people will generally make table or make layouts with in the future. I'll show kind of the easiest method. So these first couple are things that, well, you might have to use once in a while, but mostly I'm just here just to show off what the possibilities are. So I have this CSS file here is just a second one that I have linked after that initial sort of basic style sheet. I have the container, which I will show here, is just a sort of a top-level element containing everything there that just has a fixed width. This doesn't necessarily have to be a fixed width. I could make it percentage, but for this layout, just to try and match what was on the original site, we're going to give that a fixed width. Position relative, and then the left and right auto margin makes it centered. So now let's remember we have an image container and a mission description. Those are really the two divs here that we want to sort of make into columns. So I'm going to uncomment out this section of the CSS. So the first approach is to just set the width percentage on both of the elements, and we can do that. And there we go. Now we have this one taking up 30% and this one taking up 70% of the width. Now there's an issue when we do this, and I will go ahead and demonstrate. I'll bring up Firebug, or you can do F12 as well. You notice I had to do. This is probably coming across kind of slow, kind of small on the screen. But there's something funny looking here that says margin right equals -4 pixels. What happens if I get rid of that is things bounce down to the next line. Why does that happen? Well, because I have this width set to 30% and this width set to 70%. That adds up to 100%. Why don't they fit onto the same line? Well, the reason that in the HTML code there's space. There's like a little bit of white space between these two elements. If I had these butting up against each other like that, then it wouldn't matter. And see, it matters. It matters for the later ones I didn't change, but the top one, it does matter. But this is going to be very unreadable code. You don't want to write code like that. And plus, in some cases, that little bit of white space, is what you want. So it's not, it's not like you could just have you could have an automated tool to remove the white space, but it's, sometimes you want it there. So that's a difficulty with that method. Yeah.
Could you say instead of 30-70% equal 100%, could you say 28%?
You could.
And 60%?
So that's a possible solution. Is you could you could take a percentage point or two off of the width, and that would work. But another solution that sort of lets you keep the percentages exactly what you want is changing the margins that go between the two elements to -4, which it seems weird to have a negative margin, but effectively when you have a negative margin, it sort of pulls the element in that direction a little bit, which is interesting. So that's one. And it's not terribly elegant because of that weird margin issue. But that's one approach that you'll see on occasion. And historically, before sort of modern tools like Bootstrap, which we'll look at a little bit later, that was one way to accomplish what we're doing here. Here's a second way. I've got like 4 or 5 of these. Instead of the margin, the negative margin, we can use float. What float does is you give float a direction, left or right, and that element will shift all the way to the left or all the way to the right. As far as it can go. So this is another way of dealing with the white space issue. I'm just floating both of these to the left, so they're both just going as far to the left as they can go within their container, and the container has position relative, so it sort of that's sort of where the buck stops. It goes to the far left of that container. And so with that, and let's see, did I, oops. Oh, I didn't. I need to save the file before I refresh. There we go. So there's our column layout back again. And I'll go ahead and comment that out. Here's another option. What I'm doing here is I'm taking the image container and giving it absolute position. Absolute position means it just it sticks there, but it doesn't affect the layout of the rest of the elements. So the image container will have absolute position. It'll stick right there. Meanwhile, the description will have a big margin, or sometimes you could have a big padding on the left side. So the image container is going to be 200 pixels and absolute position. And the mission will have a 200 pixel margin on the left side. And so the image container will actually sit in the margin of the mission description. So we'll refresh here. What we can do here, if I hover over this in Firebug, we get those colors on the screen. You can see the yellow is the margin. So the blue is the contents of the actual contents of the div there. The yellow is the margin, and so you can see the picture there is just sitting on top of the margin.
Jacob, it's really instructive to see the different ways you attack this. It really helps you understand the essence of divs and margin control.
Yep. Here's a fun method. Starting with the most recent version of CSS. So the oldest of old browsers don't support this, but pretty much any browser that anyone's using today will support this. We've added CSS rules or CSS values for the display attribute called table and table row and table cell. So this is kind of the way to make things most, if you want it really exactly like your old table layout, you can attach these classes in your HTML, and then say display table row, display table cell, and it's really as if those had been TR or TD elements in a table. And so we can refresh here, and obviously I don't have everything exactly everything set with the padding and margin. yeah, display is supported, but the table row and table cell are not.
I see.
And I don't remember off the top of my head which browsers, how far back you have to go until you hit a browser that doesn't support that.
Can you speak a little bit to the issue of compliance and websites that will verify if your site is written so that it's compliant?
Sure. Yeah, there are different browsers made by different companies. Some are open source, some aren't. Microsoft's Internet Explorer, for years was always kind of treated a lot of CSS rules a little bit differently, than other browsers. Although Microsoft is kind of becoming more and more like the other browsers, thankfully. So it's less painful to get what you want in Internet Explorer. You can if you're ever doing anything really really obscure with your CSS, you always want to research online which browsers support the CSS rules that you're using, because sometimes different browsers use these differently. If you really need to support older browsers, there are sort of JavaScript files, JavaScript libraries that people have written that will sort of take your CSS or JavaScript. This is true for JavaScript as well, not just CSS. Find things in your code that aren't supported and sort of rewrite them so that they are supported, just for those other browsers.
May I add, Jacob, the sort of principle behind compliance, the importance of it. So, as Jacob said, because there are so many browsers now on so many different platforms, and probably more are going to come up as new devices appear, that designing your website so that it works on all platforms is a really, really important issue for many web design projects. So you can pass your code through these compliant checks, and they'll tell you what you need to change. Brent, I think you have some experience with compliant testing websites, no? Or I may be wrong about that, but okay. I'm sorry for interrupting, Jacob. I just asking Brent if you had any experience with using websites that test if your code is compliant or not. Yeah. Right. Right. Which is very, very time consuming. Great, thank you, Brent. Sorry for interrupting, Jacob.
Okay, so I have a couple examples here of sort of the flexibility of using semantic HTML and keeping style in CSS. Things that could be done, could be done with tables maybe, but it would be more, a little bit more difficult. We looked earlier at the float rule, where we just floated everything to the left. Well, here's another possibility, depending on what exactly we wanted. Instead of having the mission description fill up, the entirety of the the remaining 70% after the first element is 30%. I'm going to make it smaller, but I'm going to float it to the right. And when I do this, you see now there's some space in the middle, and this is just sent to the as far right as it can go within its container. So that's fun. Here's a fun one. What if what if I want to just reorder the columns? If I only have 2 columns, well, I can float the image container to the right and float the mission description to the left. And now, oops. I think one of these images is a little too wide for the container.
Jacob, this is very, very interesting.
Well, I'd have to fiddle with that, but we can reorder the columns.
Cool.
And you see this. This is you're seeing part of why sometimes people do why people sometimes will go off and just use a table because sometimes just using CSS. Things can happen. I mean, I did a demonstration here. I ran through all these examples immediately before the webcast, and they all worked fine. And here I changed something over the course of the last few minutes that. I see. I think I needed to add a clear. I put a clear on the wrong element. There we go. What clear does is just sends everything to the next line. You see that oftentimes in conjunction with floating, where since the description and the images here are sometimes different heights. Sometimes we'll have to want to bounce something down to the next line so that it doesn't just try and fall in line with with an element that's higher on the page. So we can use clear. So even though it will float, it won't float up to the next line. It'll stay on its own line. And then of course there's what if we decide we don't really want a table layout at all. And we just want the pictures on top, followed by the text. We can do that too, just with CSS. So that's sort of all just plain CSS. I am running short on time, so I'm going to try and pick up the pace here a little bit. I think you guys maybe have looked at Bootstrap a little bit in the last couple weeks. Bootstrap provides a in fact, why don't I think I have the page. Here's the website where you can have a look at Bootstrap. Just get bootstrap.com. Bootstrap is sort of is a front-end framework that has lots of CSS and JavaScript stuff written for you to help make your site look good. One of the things Bootstrap provides are little classes for making a grid or making a column layout. So right here I have a Bootstrap CSS file that I've downloaded from the Bootstrap website, and you can explore that website. It has sort of instructions on how to do everything. I have a CSS file that I've downloaded from that website, so it's not one that I've written. I actually have written practically no custom CSS to get the layout that we're going to see, but I've added classes here to some of my elements. So this you see this call-sm-12. call-lg-6. So the deal with Bootstrap is that by default, at least, every element is 12 columns wide. So if I want something to take up all 12 columns, I'll give it a class column dash, and then the middle here is a screen size, and then dash the number. So the cool thing about Bootstrap is that it will respond to different screen sizes. So here, these mission elements, I say for large screens, that's LG, they should be 6 columns, which is half. And then for smaller screens, it should only be 12. So here's this page, and you see each mission here is taking up half of the container, 6 out of 12. But if I make the screen smaller, now they take up the whole. They take up 12 out of 12 columns. And if I look further down at the image and the mission description, I'm just saying for medium-sized screens, I was going to say the image container has 4 out of 12, so that's 1/3. 8 out of 12, so that's 2/3. If you want finer grained detail than that, it's a little bit trickier to accomplish with Bootstrap, but that's for just about every purpose. That works out. And the nice thing about Bootstrap is that if when you go to a small screen, it sort of defaults everything to being on its own line. So you have a nice mobile-friendly layout where you don't have to scroll left and right. Everything's in one column. And that's a really slick way to make a column layout. However, something that you might notice, looking at my HTML here, this is not semantic HTML. We talked about wanting to have separation of concerns, right? We don't want layout in our HTML. We want layout in our that affects the style of the page. This is HTML saying, hey, make this 6 columns, or hey, make this 4 columns. And we don't want that in our HTML if we can help it. Ideally, these, we would control everything from the CSS.
Excuse me, Jacob. And the reason, again, for that separation of concerns is that you may have a team of designers that are responsible for the overall look and feel, and they should be addressing just one set of files, the CSS. You may have content developers that are working on just the content, so you want to keep.
And in fact, we might have different elements, elsewhere on the page that we want to sort of match up and have the same kind of style. And if that's true, and we want to change the layout, we'd have to add and remove these classes in a bunch of different places, as opposed to just having one CSS rule that governs all of them. Especially if it's a situation like this where I have sort of the same thing 3 times. Now, maybe for if there were more of these, I might have it dynamically generated. But here, already I have 3 places where I'd have to change that number if I wanted to change that number. So Bootstrap, there's a cool solution and a cool thing to learn about if you guys are interested in exploring this some more in your free time is something called Less. L-E spelled L-E-S-S. Less is I guess the description here is is a good description. It extends the CSS language, so it makes more things possible. I should say the same sorts of things are possible in terms of making columns and changing colors and changing styles as you can use with CSS, but it makes CSS much easier to write. And it's because you can, like in their example here, you create a color once and then as this variable, and then you can reuse that variable multiple times in your CSS, in your less code. And another nice feature of less is what they call mix-ins, which are sort of just reusable CSS rules. We're going to use mix-ins that are provided by Bootstrap. So Bootstrap, when you download Bootstrap, you have the option of getting just the CSS, like what we were using earlier, or you can get the less code. And let's have a look at what the less looks like. Here in my project, there's actually quite a bit. There are a lot of files here, so it looks scary at first. But here's the Bootstrap less code that I've downloaded, and we can. Well, it's gonna look confusing if we just look at one of these files because there's a lot going on here. But the key point is that Bootstrap provides little we call mix-ins that we can reuse in our own less file, and some of those govern the column layout. There are mix-ins that do a variety of things, but some of them govern the column layout. So what I have here I have a less file that I'm going to use. And as opposed to having those call-sm-12 or call-lg-6 classes in my HTML, what I have here is I've accomplished the same thing using a CSS rule for my mission class, and using a mix-in from less. And if this is confusing, don't worry about it. There are great tutorials. Even this less website, which you can Google for. It'll probably be the first result. That kind of shows you all the stuff that less can do. That gives us these functions, so I can go back to using my original HTML without those classes, and what I'm going to do is uncomment. Here I still have a link to that sort of basic styles sheet that just has like the font and the a couple little things. Then I'm also linking in my less file, which is this one with the mix-ins. And in addition to this less file, I'm also linking in a script which you can get on that less website that basically just enables us to use less. This is a JavaScript file. That what this will do is on the sorry Dana, sorry I'm running a little over time. We'll finish here really quickly. It'll just be a couple more minutes. This script will run on the client-side browser, and it will convert our less file into CSS. So if we have a look. Refresh there, and here's our layout that we made with those Bootstrap mix-ins. And if I bring up Firebug, we can look at the CSS. And there's a ton of stuff here. The reason there's a ton of stuff is because I have included Bootstrap, which has a lot of CSS rules. And I see all this stuff is Bootstrap. Well, we're not using very much of it, but we're using just a small fraction of it. But that less file, even though it's a .less, it's not a .css like your CSS file usually is. That JavaScript file is converting that less file into CSS that the browser understands. So that's cool. The issue, though, is that it's a little bit slow. So you can do that when you're just testing things. But you notice when I refresh the page, gosh, it's such a small page, but it's loading really slow, and that's because that less conversion is taking a long time. So there's a better thing we can do. I'm going to comment out that section. What we can do is we can do what we call pre-compiling our less code. So what I'm going to do. This looks scary, but it's not as scary as it looks. Is use the command line. It's not DOS. This is actually a program called Node.js. And I will navigate to sort of the directory where I have all my files saved. And there's a program that I have downloaded from the Less website. In fact, I can show it on the Less website. It says, okay, there's the command line usage. And it says you just use less C. It tells you how to install it in the first place. And then the command is less C for less compile, and then the name of the file. And I think if I look at my folder here, I think, yeah, okay, there's a I have a public HTML file, and then inside in a folder, and inside that folder there's a styles folder, and then there's a CSS. So I'm going to get the path right here. Styles, less styles.less, and then I can I think after that I can tell it. I think if I just do that. It kind of shows me what the CSS. Remember that less file was very small, but at the top I'm importing Bootstrap. So this file sort of includes all that Bootstrap code, all that Bootstrap less code, plus this little bit of my own less code. And that's a lot of CSS, which is why we're pre-compiling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it, and again, the instructions to do this are all on that less website. I'm going to give it a name for a file that I want it to create. And I've done that, and see in NetBeans over here that file appeared. So I can click on this file and see here's a CSS file that has all of that CSS. This is a big file, and this is minified so that it's all sort of crammed together. And so that's what we call pre-compiled. And so what I'll do now is just very simply now I'm back to just having two. Let me reorder this here. I'm back to just having two CSS files. The first one is just that old styles with the font and everything. And the second one is here is my is the CSS that was generated from that less code. It's just a .css file now. And now if we go back and look at our page, now it comes up really quickly, just like it used to. It's just CSS. There's no funny compiling going on. And if we look at CSS, now there's two CSS styles here, which is the small one, and then less styles, which is really big. And that is one that is one consideration to using something like Bootstrap. And Bootstrap is not the only front-end framework that does this kind of stuff. It's maybe the widest used right now. The drawback, of course, to using one of those frameworks is that it might have more stuff than you need, so it's a little can be a little bloated. But the good news is that computers and even phones are increasingly faster and able to handle it. So that concludes kind of my little demo on different ways to make column layout. I think in the future, more and more web designers will use this approach of using less. And there's a similar sort of CSS similar framework built on top of CSS called Sass, and less and Sass I think will become more and more popular as time goes on. Combining these with frameworks like Bootstrap to make just very concise. Look at how concise this is. Very concise code to make your column layout.
Jacob, this is spectacular. Thank you. Maybe just get some quick feedback before we adjourn. Nick, what were the most interesting parts to you of this? Or Brent, chime in. Nick or Brent, yeah. Go ahead, Brent. Yeah. Right. Great. Thank you, Brent. Nick, any feedback from you? Questions that we can address in the next webcast? Do you see ways of using what Jacob presented in your own personal website evolution? Okay. All right, Nick. To be continued next week. Jacob, thank you. I love the way you broke this down and made many different solutions. I thought that was a very clever way of presenting all the options in one file. All right. Have a good rest of the weekend, guys. To be continued next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jacob.